Have you ever wondered what happens to the rest of the image from your camera sensor when you're shooting video? Yeah, that stuff. On most modern hybrid photo video cameras today, we have a sensor that's usually a 3:2 ratio. So when we're shooting photos, we're getting a 3:2 image. But when we go to shoot video, it crops off the top and bottom so that we're shooting in 16:9. And of course, 16:9 is a popular video ratio, so you may prefer to shoot that way anyway. But what would happen if you had the ability to record every single pixel from the entire 3:2 sensor and then choose which part of it you actually wanted to use for your final image? There are a handful of advantages that come up from shooting in that way, including better reframing, easier shooting for multiple platforms, and more. This is what people mean when they refer to shooting open gate video, and I think that it's the next big thing for video creators. So let's take a look at what this means for you, how it can improve your video creation process, and a few things that you might want to keep in mind when shooting open gate. Secure the cup, and let's get into it. The term open gate itself is actually a holdover from shooting with film when there was literally a film gate that would create the space to allow light to hit the film. Open gate in the case of film meant that the opening allowed for the light to hit the entire recordable area of the film with no crop. So similarly, when we refer to open gate on a digital sensor, even though there's no physical gate there, it just means that we're recording using the entire size of the sensor. Now, it's key to note here that not many hybrid mirrorless cameras as of right now actually have this ability, but as a part of my partnership with Panasonic, I've been shooting for the last little while with the Lumix S5 Mark II X, which is one of the few cameras in this class that actually offers an open gate mode, and it's been fantastic. It has a 24 megapixel sensor with a 3:2 ratio, which is big enough for them to allow for 6K 3:2 full sensor readout. So we end up with a frame that's nearly 6,000 by 4,000 pixels to work with, much larger than your typical 4K resolution. This aspect ratio and resolution gives us a handful of advantages, maybe the most exciting of which is the ability to shoot one time and reframe for multiple purposes. For example, I shot this quick creator highlight video of my friend Matt, and I knew at the start that I was going to want both a horizontal and a vertical version so that we could post it on multiple platforms and still have it look great.
Hi, I'm Matt Littlewood. I'm an adventure photographer based out of Banff. Most of what I shoot is landscape and adventure photography. I spend a lot of time outside. In doing so, I found myself appreciating nature a whole lot more. My favorite part about taking a camera with me is I get to look a little closer to the beauty around me rather than just passing it by. Looking a little bit closer and spending a bit more time with it really makes you feel more a part of it. The reason why I share my photos with people is to encourage them to get outside and experience the beauty around us. In that experience, people will respect nature more and save it for future generations.
If I had shot this in the typical 4K 16:9 aspect ratio and then tried to crop it so that I could get the vertical version, all of the framing would have ended up super tight. Or if I was shooting in a typical 4K and I decided to shoot a little bit wider than I needed for the horizontal version so that I could then crop in for the vertical, then I would also end up having to crop the horizontal version afterwards to get the framing that I really want, potentially losing quality. But because I shot it with the S5 Mark II X open gate mode, I can easily create a 4K 16:9 version, and I've also got more vertical space to create a 9:16 version too, without having to sacrifice framing or quality for either version. Having horizontal and vertical deliverables is a super common thing for video clients to ask for nowadays, as well as something that's important for video content creators who work on multiple platforms, like yours truly. On the S5 Mark II X, as well as with a lot of external monitors, you have the ability to add frame markers as well. So when you're composing your frame, you can keep in mind both compositions that you might be outputting later. Originally, I was using the 9:16 frame guide to scope out the vertical frame in my horizontal view, but what I ended up doing is actually using a rule of thirds grid and then using a 16:9 frame marker and thinking of each piece of that rule of thirds thirds grid as its own 9x16 frame since it's so close to that ratio. And to be honest, I haven't shot anything in an actual vertical orientation since I got this camera because it just works so seamlessly to shoot 3x2 and crop. But even if you know for certain that you're only going to need a horizontal video in the end, there are still advantages to shooting in open gate. For example, in the interview that I shot with Matt, I wanted to be able to put his name up above his head. By shooting in open gate, I actually had the ability to shift the whole frame into a place where I felt like the framing worked better to have a title above his head. On top of just fully reframing, this also gives you a little bit of a buffer area in case a point of interest is just outside the typical 16:9 area. And this relates to another advantage of open gate, the ability to create fake camera movement. I've talked a few times about fake camera movement in my videos before, but this 6K open gate gives us the opportunity to do more types of movement without any loss in quality, which is awesome. If we had a typical 4K 16:9 shot and we wanted to do fake camera movement, we would have to crop into the total resolution, then keyframe the movement, which means that technically we're losing image quality when played back in 4K. But with the open gate 6K video starting from a place of having it just fill the 16:9 frame, we can keyframe up or down to create movement only using the extra space on the top and bottom without having to crop past the full resolution of a 4K image. And of course, because it's 6K, on top of that, we can also punch in by like 1.5 times before we even actually reach that 4K resolution as well. And this also applies to what we were talking about before, cropping in to create vertical video as well. Because we've got nearly 4,000 pixels in the height of our image, we have more than a full 4K vertical output that we can keyframe fake camera movements into from side to side by basically 3 times the width of our frame. So if your subject walks from one side of the frame to the other, we can actually have our camera follow them the whole way. Of course, 16:9 and 9:16 aren't the only two options out there, and shooting in open gate allows the ability to choose your output ratio not only to match the platform, but for aesthetic reasons as well. While a 3:2 ratio is much more known for being a photographic style, maybe that's exactly why you might want to create something in that ratio. Or you could crop in a bit on the sides and get a 4:3 ratio for that retro look that a lot of people are going for now. You could also do a 4:5 to match the Instagram feed, or a 1:1 if the square vibe fits what you're looking for. And of course, technically you can always crop into whatever ratio you want as long as you have enough resolution, but shooting in open gate definitely makes this whole process easier than trying to crop in from a widescreen 16:9 ratio. 6K resolution definitely helps as well. Now, if you're familiar with some of the previous Panasonic cameras, you may remember that this full sensor open gate mode used to go by a different name. It was called anamorphic before because it can be beneficial to have a taller aspect ratio when shooting with anamorphic lenses. And even though they changed the name, this is still a really helpful mode for anamorphic. The way anamorphic lenses work actually squeezes your image in from the side so they naturally fill up a taller aspect ratio in the first place. And then it's up to you to de-squeeze them in post. If you try to shoot with an anamorphic lens in a 16:9 ratio, the first thing that we'll notice is that it crops the top and bottom as you would expect, same thing that we were dealing with before. But then also when we de-squeeze both versions, you're getting a much narrower ratio in the end with the 16:9 version. And if you were to then crop the version that was shot in 16:9 to make the height match, you're now losing information on the top, the bottom, and both sides compared to the shot that was done in 3:2. Now, all this is going to depend to some extent on the anamorphic squeeze factor that you're shooting with and what you're hoping for as an output ratio, but the moral of the story here is that with open gate, you just get to keep so much more information. And with the Lumix S5 Mark II X, there's nothing saying I can't shoot in 16:9 mode if I find a reason that I prefer that for the project. Not to mention that there's also an APS-C cropped 4:3 version if I really want that as well. Now, when you're shooting in a taller aspect ratio like open gate 3:2, there are a couple of things that you want to keep in mind. Like I mentioned before, trying to keep in mind that final output is a great thing to do while you're shooting. Using that rule of thirds grid and a frame marker on the S5 Mark II X is my go-to method for now, but you just have to figure out what works best for you. Shooting a little bit wider than you think you might need is also still a good habit to get into, since you'll have the extra space to make adjustments in this mode. I find that this is even more beneficial on closer up shots. You need to be a little bit more careful if you're going to be doing multiple crops in the end. But overall, I found the transition from shooting 16:9 to open gate 3:2 shooting super straightforward, and really only found it helpful for my workflow. This is why I personally think that open gate filming is the next big thing for video creators, not because I'm expecting to see a bunch of 3:2 videos out there, but more because it's so helpful in the video creation process. But as always, I want to hear from you. Is open gate something that interests you as a video creator? Leave a comment down below, and on your way down, remember to hit that like and subscribe button. Huge thank you to Panasonic for partnering with me on this video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.